I guess I'm going to ramble on some about bullying and talk about the summer that I skateboarded with Damien Echols. A lot of you may not know who Damien Echols is. I did do a video on here when I did YouTube in the past talking about this, but I took down the old videos. So I'm going to talk about it again from, I guess, a fresh perspective. But Damien Echols is known for the West Memphis 3, West Memphis, Arkansas, where 3 little boys were found dead in this patch of woods in West Memphis called the Robin Hood Trails. And Damien and 2 other guys, I went to high school with all 3 of them, Damien Echols, Jesse Miss Kelly, and Jason Baldwin. I may have my dates a little wrong if they were arrested. I'm thinking it was in '92, and me and him hung out the year before in '91. But I could have the years off by a year, just somewhere in there. But in any case, those 3 guys and me, we all went to the same high school, which was a suburb of West Memphis called Marion. It's a little tiny town, Marion, Arkansas. Marion, Arkansas. If you think of West Memphis, Arkansas, it's right across, if you look on a map, it's across the Mississippi River, directly across from Memphis, Tennessee. And I don't know how it looks now, because I haven't been there in years, but it was what I remember of it, a dirty, filthy place for the most part in the early 90s. And anyway, I'll go back to this, but if you don't know about the West Memphis 3, it became a famous case because celebrities got involved in it. So look that up if you haven't heard of it. It's an interesting case. But going to bullying has happened in my life since probably 2nd grade for me. I've stated in other videos that I had an unstable childhood in a lot of ways, a lot of moving around. My biological father was gone before I was born. Some chaos in my family. I mean, just to give you an example, as a baby, I was kidnapped by my aunt. I had an aunt that was an alcoholic who, I don't think she could have kids. She hit my mom over the head and kidnapped me as a baby. So kind of crazy. I had some pretty crazy individuals, especially on my mom's side of the family. I'm sure some of those genetics have probably, it's in the family line. I'm sure some of my issues are genetic. But when you take chaotic upbringing as well, I'm sure some of my anxiety and other things probably were developed from the time I was a baby because of things like that, being kidnapped and having things like that happen. My mom had to get me back in court. First stepfather was an alcoholic. He was abusive. He was physically and emotionally abusive to my mother. So we were with him from probably the time I was a baby, somewhere around that time till 5, almost 6 years old. I had another stepfather. It was in the military, and from the time I was like 6 to 12, and we moved around a lot. There was different schools. Sometimes I've estimated that maybe I went to, 12 to 15 different schools, taking an estimate. So the thing with Tracy, which was the stepfather in the military, is he was always fighting with his ex-wife, and he had 2 kids that he would get visitations of, and they were my step-siblings. He had emotional issues. I think looking back, he probably was very depressive. He didn't take care of himself. He had medical issues as well. And it got to a point where he was forced out of the military because of the medical issues. I don't remember him being much of a hands-on father at all. So he didn't take up a lot of time with me. I'll say that. He wasn't like, wouldn't say just abusive, but he was just neglectful. I'm sure he was with my mother too. And my mother had issues through this whole time too. She had mental collapse at one point being with him, and there's a lot of things. And then it got to a point where when he was forced out of the military, we ended up at times where we couldn't pay power bills, power gets shut off, or one point we got evicted from a house, and that's about the time they split up. And when they split up, I never saw my step siblings ever again. They were just out of my life, just like that. And then he was gone after several years, and even though he was neglectful, I still saw him as a dad, because you talk about 6 years. But the point is, I didn't have any mentorship as a kid, really, and I didn't have any sense of identity, and I was bullied through grade school. Whatever schools we were moving to, I dealt with bullying, and probably one of the most severe things I can remember from an early age is being on the school bus and dreading it. And I was only like maybe 6, maybe 7 years old, and this older girl. You would think an older boy would do this. I don't know. We talk about SA, and abuse, and I guess you could kind of say this is kind of like that, because this girl would grab me in an inappropriate area and she would just squeeze. It's only 6 or 7 years old. She did this to me on the school bus, like, gosh, it might have been daily. So this is one of my earliest memories of, I would say, it was extreme bullying. So you think, okay, I was with an alcoholic dad from a baby to 5, 6, had this type of bullying at 6. And then it just kept going on through grades where different bullying would happen. So, I was taking hits to my character and development from the time I was almost born. So, anyway, the bullying just went on. So what happened is, after Tracy, me and my mother were on our own for a while, and it was rough. And my mother went through abuse issues with herself, with substance abuse issues, and we were struggling to make it on our own. I mean, we lived with people, then we lived in a hotel, and then we did live on our own in a place that wasn't so great. And she was dealing with her own mental issues at the time and substance abuse stuff. And then she met who I consider my dad today, which she met when I was 12, and we lived in southern Alabama at the time when she met him. And he also had issues of his own. Actually, they both worked in nightclubs. He was a DJ. I think by daytime he worked as a meat cutter as well. But my mother just worked in nightclubs, and they met, and they were both dealing with substance issues, but they fell in love. And just like that, I never saw the other guy again that my mother was married to, Tracy. Now she's with this guy, Mike, and suddenly they're dropping me off at his mother's house, which I didn't know. It's your new grandmother. Like, okay. So I'm dropped off somewhere. I don't know this person, no familiarity. Can't you pronounce this word? So I'm dropped off there. They go down to Florida. They decide we're going to move somewhere else, try to start anew. And they go down there with me not really realizing they're trying to just get things established, but also get off substances, try to establish something. Eventually they do get me, take me down there. We're living in a hotel for a while. then they do get an apartment. But it was a little better there in Florida as far as I had friends in the apartments we lived in. School wasn't so great. The bullying was not as heavy, though. During that time period, it was a little better in some sense. But I still dealt with several issues with myself at that time. One of them, I think, well, depression was there, I think, off and on. And not wanting to go to school, which had started really when I was about 12 because of all the bullying I dealt with. So I fought with wanting to go to school at times. And kind of lost my train of thought there. But anyway, the bullying right there in Florida wasn't as bad, but I still had issues from all of the stuff I had already dealt with. Probably had OCD. Well, I definitely did. I wasn't diagnosed, but I know I did looking back at it. Had to touch things a lot, had to repeat behaviors a lot. I would have to reread things a lot. Eventually kind of got past all that years later. It just kind of, I guess you could say in some ways outgrew it. But I went through that too. I was probably childish in ways compared to other kids. As far as some things, playing with toys and different things until, I was over 13 years old, I guess. And I don't know if that was a result of trauma and anxiety, different things like that. But anyway, eventually, my parents struggled in Florida. My stepdad, my third stepdad, and my mom. And they decided, they didn't know how this was going to be, but they decided to move to West Memphis, Arkansas. Now, you think about this, it's around 1990, 91, and my dad liked to gamble. Mike liked to gamble, and he worked as a meat cutter, but he, like so many people, I don't really blame him in some ways, like so many people that hate their jobs, they don't really want to do their jobs, and I know how this is today. I understand it. It can be misery to go to a place you don't want to go to, deal with things like that you're forced to spend hours of your day somewhere you don't want. So a lot of times he gambled. He had a dream of, he liked to bet on dog races and stuff like that. And there was a big dog track in West Memphis at that time by the river across from Memphis, Tennessee. And I think today that's actually a casino. I think it's been turned into a casino, but it was a dog track back then. And he thought, well, if we moved there, he got near this dog track, he was going to work at the dog kennels. He had found that he could get a job there with working with the dogs, helping like take care of them, things of that nature. I have a little coffee here. If you haven't noticed, I don't know, or maybe I've said it in past videos, I'm addicted to coffee, black coffee. And I like wolves. I have wolf stuff around my apartment. But anyway, we moved to West Memphis. So, and they just had no idea what the culture shock of that was going to be. It was just night and day, because I think the reason why I wasn't bullied as much in Florida, it was a little better for me because there was a lot more open-mindedness than in Central Florida. In Orlando, I became a skateboarder. Actually something I was really good at. I had friends that did it. It was a very popular thing to do around those apartments, and the people I knew all did it. And I took to it very well, became good at jumping ramps and doing trick stuff on the skateboard and all that stuff, and enjoyed it. And everyone dressed a certain way down there. For 1990, everything was very inclusive actually for that time in Florida. I had one white friend, my other friends were black and Hispanic. I had an Asian friend. Talking about around these apartments. Well, the Asian friend I think was from school. At school I really didn't have friends except for him. But anyway, I had to leave all that behind. We go to West Memphis, and I went from a school in Central Florida that was our ninth grade center had like it was its own school. It had if I remember right, it was like over 700 students, maybe. It might have been around 800. It was just big. And if you had to do anything else extracurricular, a lot of that stuff was done over on the main campus. You took a bus over to the 10th, 11th, 12th grade school. This was Winter Park, Florida, which is a suburb of Orlando. And I started to go half my 10th grade year at the main campus, and it was huge, like a college size of a place for a lot of places. It was just huge. So the library was like 2 stories, and they had everything imaginable. They had multiple foreign languages you could take. They had swim team, and I believe there was a tennis team, and you had all the regular sports teams. And during the time I went there, the football team, Winter Park football team, was big, and I think they might have played for a national championship, or not national, but a state championship while I was going there. Go to West Memphis, we moved to this little suburb of Marion, and the whole Marion High School is like, I believe it's around 600 students from 9 to 12. But it's not just that, it was small. But because it was small, everybody was in clique there, and it was very, I mean, I guess it's stereotypical, but I mean, it was redneck. It was just compared to where I came from, where everything was a lot more, got down to Florida and had been bullied less than I had been all through the years, and got to be a little bit more of trying, I guess, to form some sort of identity. Well, you get to Marion, Arkansas, and all the main kids are dressed like, kind of like cowboys, and not to make fun of cowboys, but that's how they were. They were all kind of countrified, and the guys, the main popular guys, wore these steel-toed boots, their button-up shirts, but a lot of them just had attitude problems. They were ugly to people. And this was what's crazy is this was the worst bullying I had ever had to endure when we got there. Of course, my parents they were not going to know this. Could they have put more thought into the culture shock that would happen going from Central Florida to Arkansas? I mean, I don't know, because you are talking about 1990, 91, and a lot of racism existed, and a lot more than today. And Florida was more inclusive, but a lot of places in the South were still, I can vouch for going to this place and seeing firsthand and remembering how it was. And there were black kids in Marion, Arkansas, in the Marion High School, but it was the weirdest thing. I remember going to lunchtime there, and they stayed off to themselves. Most of them, they just, not all the time, but I noticed at lunchtime, they kind of were all in their own thing, which I found unusual, because down in Florida, it wasn't like that. Everybody was interacted together, and nobody thought of race in that way. I mean, my black friends and Asian friend and Hispanic friend stayed the night with me, and I'm pretty sure I did. Well, yeah, I did. I spent the night at their places. They spent the night at my place. It was like that. But I got down there, and it was just so different, and there was no skateboarders. It was hard as hell to find anyone that was into the skateboarding, so I was having to do that alone, and couldn't meet anybody. And I dressed different, because down in Central Florida, just everything was a little more, you just had to see the way people dressed at the time. I mean, my jeans were like, there were buttons all over them back in that day. That was a style. Baggy jeans, the parachute looking type of jeans. That was a style down there. The shirts were kind of like that too. Some of the shirts, that kind of stuff. There might have been a little bit of a grunge look starting to come in. But you get to Marion, and it's just a typical countrified look. And if you don't look like that, you get singled out. So I got singled out, and I got singled out by the most popular kid Still remember his name to this day. His name was Chris Franklin. And he was like the most popular guy there. And he decided that he was going to target me. So I had to deal with this. Now, this is when it gets to Damien Echols. Damien Echols went to Marion High School. And like I said, if you don't know about the West Memphis 3, you could just Google that. It'll pull up anything you want to know about him and Jason Baldwin, Jesse Miss Kelly. But Damien he's the one known the most for the 3 guys that were arrested for the murder of these 3 boys in that crime. Ended up that they served like 18 years roughly. I guess they went into jail around maybe 1993, went into prison in Arkansas. And there's a lot of documentaries on this. So if you don't know about it, you like true crime, you'll definitely find this case interesting. But they could never link DNA to them. And there's a lot of inconsistencies with this case. And they used, Damien was kind of, he's kind of dark. But I was dark too in ways. Even as a teenager, I was developing some of the dark ways that I still have to this day, like with metal music and horror. I was starting to like these sorts of things at that time. Interest in some dark things. I think a lot of kids go through it. You develop interest. It doesn't mean that you're going to be a serial killer. It doesn't mean that you're going out and going to commit crimes. Damien had I wouldn't say we were just friends. We were like an acquaintances, hung out some during the summer, and I want to say it was the summer before he got arrested. And it was 91, 92. I don't have the exact dates, but anyway, how that came to be is Damien skateboarded. And there was one other kid I knew that skateboarded. I had met another kid on the street behind me. We lived in this little neighborhood in Marion that people referred to as the doll houses. They were all colorful little houses that were all these pre-manufactured, I guess, type houses that they could throw up really quick, and they all kind of looked alike for the most part throughout this neighborhood. That was probably 5 or 6 streets, if I remember right. And there was a kid, I think his name was Brian, maybe. I can't remember exactly, but he lived on the street behind me. He skateboarded. And I found out about him, and we skateboarded some. Well, him and Damien hung out, and that's how I met him. And he started coming around, and he skateboarded. And the thing with Damien is, too, he wore dark clothes. He had jet black hair, so he had a dark aesthetic to him as well. He had a sarcasm to him, a humor. So do I. I mean, I've had that sarcasm and humor before as well. So he makes some dark jokes. I mean, I've made dark jokes. Lots of kids have made dark jokes. Lots of teenagers, lots of adults make dark jokes. But the thing is, he was targeted a lot in Marion because, like I said, if you're different, they target you. He dealt with a lot of bullying. He dealt with a lot of harassment from the cops. I even dealt with some harassment from the cops. If you wasn't from that town and you didn't fit in with the kids there, you would get that. They would want to, ask you where you're going, what you're doing, even if you're not, you have no record, you haven't been doing anything. So, in any case, let's go back to the bullying. I was dealing with Chris Franklin. I was dealing with his people. There was one time they jumped me getting off the bus, came up in a car, and ended up, I'll be the first to admit I couldn't fight. I mean, I would tell people years later, oh yeah, I could, and this and that. That's because of I've talked about this in previous videos. I had no sense of identity, personality. So there's times I'd make up that I was stronger, tougher than I was. Did I try to fight back? Yeah, but I wasn't really good at defending myself. But the point is, should I have been targeted anyway? No. I mean, no one should have to go through that sort of stuff. But I did, and I had to deal with that. And Chris got taken up for a lot. Cops wouldn't really do much to him. School wouldn't do much to him. And it wasn't until there was this other kid named Mike. I do remember his name, Mike McKenzie. Lived a few streets over from me. He moved from Miami, Florida. He was in gangs down there as a teenager, and his family made him move to his grandmother's house, which was a few streets over from me in Marion. She happened to live in Marion, and they were trying to get him out of the gang so he didn't keep getting in trouble. Well, when he came, they tried to target him too in Marion High School, but he could defend himself. He had been in gangs. He had a gun, and he took that gun to school. And when they threatened him, he had threatened to kill Chris. I mean, this was a different type of guy who had been in a lot of violent situations. But he befriended me, Mike McKenzie did. And once they knew he befriended me, they left me alone. So it was just kind of association with him. They left me alone too. And I was just kind of a loner with him. And there was one or two other people that were kind of hung out with us from time to time. So anyway, I dealt with all that bullying, and it was traumatizing, and a lot of times I didn't want to go to school. I skipped school there too. But Damien, going back to Damien dealt with all this because they wanted to label him in being a Satanist, and they wanted to label him as to being into the occult and to doing all these wicked, black occult, dark occult things that they had no proof or basis on any of this stuff, but they wanted to say he was doing all this stuff. What Damien has said before, I actually have his book he wrote, and I can't think of the name of the book right at the moment, but it's Life After Death. He wrote a book called Life After Death when he got out of prison. What happens, they all three guys got, Damien and the other two guys, they did get out of prison after 18 years when they were no evidence could support them ever being convicted, basically. I'll get back to that. But anyway, Damien was labeled all this stuff as being sinister. A lot of people looked at him as being sinister, and there was a lot of stories that would go around about him. And he wrote about this stuff in Life After Death, which I found fascinating because I knew him for a brief time, and I know what Marion, Arkansas is like, and a lot of stuff he talked about. I know what he was talking about and how messed up, how fucked up the place was. It really was. Everything he says, I mean, I went through in a lot of similar ways. But Damien was looked at in this way, and the cops harassed him a lot and all this stuff, and they watched him a lot, and they were just trying to pin stuff on him. So what happens when these kids end up being found in these woods, if you watch these documentaries, probably one of the most famous ones was the HBO one, Paradise Lost. It was the first one ever done, but there's several. HBO did sequels to that, and then there's been a few others. Damien's done his own documentary on it, but they ended up doing a very poor investigation. They made a lot of errors, a lot of mistakes, and because Damien had always been a target of the police, they just gravitated toward him. And then Jason and Jesse were two boys who hung out with him much more than I did. And I often had said if I had still been around when this had happened, we hung out like the summer before these boys were found dead. I often had thought if we had stayed in Marion that I would have still been hanging out with him, and who knows, it might have been pinned on me too as an outsider. But we had moved to Memphis. Like after that summer I hung out with him, we had moved to Memphis across the river. And when I heard about, we didn't talk anymore, and when I heard about this, I was in shock. I'll admit back then I really didn't know it. I didn't really follow it, and when they first said he was going to trial and he did this. I didn't know. I really just didn't do a lot of research into it. I had many of my own problems and traumas at that point that I just, marrying it traumatized me a lot too, on top of everything else I've been through to that point. And I just, I was having a lot of issues, so I didn't research it a lot. But any case, they target him. The two other boys were more friends with him, hung out with him quite a lot more than I did, and put him on trial. And they just went after him, and like they call that era too the Satanic Panic, which was going on a lot in the country. And because he liked Wicca and he liked things like that, they used all that stuff against him. They had largely just circumstantial evidence in the case, if I'm just to sum it up for you. They had no DNA, and even today, there's been some testing on a couple of things they did, and they couldn't link the DNA. They couldn't link any DNA to them. That's why they got released. They went back and looked at, well, what happened. Some celebrities got involved. Like Pearl Jam's Eddie Vedder, Johnny Depp got involved. Johnny Depp's real good friends with Damien Echols now. And Eddie Vedder and Natalie Maines of the Dixie Chicks, they all got wind of this case. And they were able to get high-powered lawyers in there to look at it again, because Damien, out of the three boys, was the only one sentenced to death row. The other two got life. But luckily, Damien had some celebrities that found out about the case. And then he had also met a woman that he's married to this day. Her name's Lori Davis. And Lori had found out about the case. And she got involved. And then they ended up later getting married. I believe they got married while he was still in prison. So he's out today. He's on YouTube. He has a YouTube channel, and he teaches high magic, which I guess I don't want to say high magic's a religion. I guess some people might consider it that. That's something else. So I guess we could discuss another time. You can look up things on high magic. But Damien Echols does have a YouTube channel where he talks about. Lately, he's been talking about karate, but he's gotten into karate. But he does teach stuff to do with spirituality and high magic. He's wrote a book or two on that. But in any case, I just remember that summer, where I skateboarded with Damien, and how my parents even remember him coming by the house, and that he was polite, and he was. And yeah, like I said, he had dark humor, so did I. And there was nothing sinister that ever happened when I was with him. We just skateboarded and made dark jokes and kidded around like a lot of teenagers do, and killed time in a town that was actually very boring. The town was boring as fuck. So, especially compared to going from Central Florida. So, anyway, I guess I'm gonna just sum it up there. And like I said again, if you're interested in true crime, yeah, definitely look up the West Memphis 3. And I'll talk to you guys later on.